On today's show, we're going to be talking about patterns and why we need to care about them. Are they the long lost savior of our design systems, or are they only useful for making a bitchin' piece of clothing? I'm Luke Murphy, and I'm joined by my co host, Michelle Chin. We're both design advocates at zeroheight, the design system management platform, and this is Design Systems WTF. Patterns. So let's start at the base. Define a pattern for us, Michelle.
I think you can think of patterns. There's like, I guess, well, a pattern generally is a guideline.
Yeah.
There can be some prescriptive elements to it, like you must use a button group or something like that, but it can have some flexible elements to it as well. Um, so yeah, it's more guidelines with some a little bit of like, because I think a component is very prescriptive, right?
Yeah.
If you think about um, what isn't prescriptive.
I I think guidelines are a good I think guidelines are a good way to like explain what a pattern is. And it's a guideline for a very specific like interaction, like user interaction or behavior. What you're trying to achieve. Do you know where they come from?
Um, no. How I saw the book earlier, but
Yeah.
for the intent and purposes of this recording, I will say no. Where do they come from? Where did they come from?
They come from this book. No, this is like one of my favorite books. So if anybody doesn't know about this is a pattern language by Christopher Alexander et al. Lots of people contributed to this. This was released in like the 60s, I think it was 70s, 1977. And basically was so they were a combination of like architects and town planners. And it's basically a collection of ideas, patterns to do with like town planning and architecture. So things like, I was just going to open it. Eccentric nucleus is quite hard to explain. 4-story limit. So like why you should limit the sort of size height of your buildings to 4 stories. How to do a neighborhood boundary, like things like this, where it's like concepts that aren't necessarily like this is how you, I don't know, build a skyscraper. It's more around and like they have things around, points of like meeting points in the middle of towns and things like that. So they're these sort of conceptual ideas that you're trying to get around and why they're important. And I think so what happened is in the 90s, a bunch of engineers sort of came across this concept, came across these books, and started to apply that to like development practices, and then that then got picked up into like web practices with things like, so like, I mean, the fact that the first, I don't know, what I would see is like one of the first big design systems was called the Yahoo Pattern Library, right? Like it was all about patterns, and actually that was how I got into this. It was all through patterns. um,
Yeah, yeah.
um Patterns and yeah, pattern libraries and style tiles. That was that was my introduction to
The good old days.
the good old days. But I suppose in design systems, to me at least, like the way that it fits in is if you have all of your like atomic levels, so your base styles and base decisions. So I'd say things like, your colors, typography, spacing, the kind of mostly the stuff that gets encoded in tokens. That's down here. That's like at your base level. I'd say that your patterns are at the very top. And patterns act as the top level guidance. I suppose the only thing that might go above patterns are things like actual guidelines or principles. And then your components kind of sit in that middle. Um, but most people don't do patterns, do they?
No, because patterns are hard.
Well, that's true. It's true. But
I don't know. So I think it's like, and maybe this is where it gets to um it can be hard depending on how your design system is organized, maybe, like, or your governance is organized. So say you have a big company and your centralized design system, and you don't know like the ins and outs of the product or the user's needs. So it might be harder for you to make recommendations of a dashboard or guidelines for a dashboard. But maybe that's just an excuse.
I kind of think it is just an excuse. I am going to adopt the view, but I'm going to share it out as if it's mine. But actually, no. Caveat: this is 100% something that I stole from Amy Hupe and Hayden Pickering, who were working on this. They were working out this concept of like system for systems kind of thing. So it's around like how you build a design system. And one of the things that one of the ideas that like Amy was telling me about and was very excited about this concept is her radical thought is that do your base layer and do your patterns. They're the first things that you need to figure out. Everything else will just figure itself out. With the very controversial take that like components don't matter for your MVP especially. Now it's the backwards way that everybody else does it because everybody else seems to start with I suppose everybody kind of starts with your base, but like I don't know, actually even then
Yeah,
I
I don't
reckon
even
people
know
yeah,
if they
people
start with the base.
people will jump in and just do a button, right? So it's like they will jump in and do components. So basically sort out your base layer, sort out your tokens, sort out your base design decisions, your colors, typography, all the like very core brand stuff, and then work on your patterns. And I think that it's what you were saying, like it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, and it requires you to work very, very closely with your product teams and with your users. Um, but I do think that actually patterns are way more important than components. I don't know. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've over rotated and over focused on components and like the detailed specs. Like I just like I don't know, do we all need to design buttons like 500, 5,000 times over? They're pretty standard. They're pretty yeah, everything's kind of already been established. Like you're not doing anything miraculously new, but yet people are so focused on those components that they're not thinking about patterns. But I think that's just because it's easier to work on components and define all those specifics.
I actually think that a good way to view this as well could be that um, it's almost like when you've got the component in mind that you're thinking of, it's like almost sort of abstracting back and going, what is the pattern that governs this? So I think if you want some examples of good patterns, there's some really good resources online. So I think that actually the gov.uk pattern library that they use, because obviously it's a very um, extensive design system because it's basically for any government site within the UK. But their patterns library is pretty good and covers off things like it covers off quite specific things. So things like how to handle gender or sex, how to handle names, how to handle passwords, to like what happens when you're confirming something, to like bigger concepts like one thing per page, which is their whole like attitude towards forms. Which I think is like it's like quite a high conceptual thing that's very hard to encapsulate within a single component, or even I don't know, like I suppose you could encapsulate it within a page, but even then, it's like if it governs all pages, it's like quite a large thing to to like cover, if that makes sense. There's also, if folks are interested, a really great catalog by the folks at If where they kind of like cataloged a whole bunch that they could see. I don't know if these are actively used, but they're like I don't know, they're quite cool to at least see. Um, but anyway, yeah, yeah, the whole abstracting back from components. Like, do you think that that's an approach that could work?
Yeah, I think, because when I started as a UX designer, we were going by patterns. Like
Yeah.
we didn't, our design system wasn't really component based. It was all patterns. Like it to the point where our site was called Patterns Matter. And it was just like collecting all the patterns from all the different products and making sure they were aligned. So like the login flow was consistent across products and they would share some similar identities from like a brand and design perspective, but it was focusing on like the layouts of pages, like the interaction, like how someone would use
Yeah.
an app.
Do you?
Um,
I'm curious. Was your team made up of? Did you have UI designers?
yeah, so there was like we were all product designers, but then we were either visual designers or interaction designers.
Oh,
So I
okay.
was an interaction designer. So
Oh, no, I was gonna say because like I can imagine that happening if you are a team that is really, really heavy on the UX side, like or background in like UX and service design, because that is the way that. Because I feel like service design felt like it was a thing about 10 years ago, and now seems to have dropped off again. But I don't know. Everybody seemed to want to hire good service designers about 10 years ago, and now I never see it on a CV.
yeah, I feel like it's really like government-based projects
Yeah,
still have service designers,
yeah.
but the
Um,
world could definitely use some more.
Well, and that's the whole thing. Like, it was actually the thing that got me interested in sort of UX and product design was because I'd heard about, well, I'd actually seen some work that some service designers had done and realized that it was pretty akin to the way that sort of I approached the projects that I was doing at that point as like a front end dev hybrid marketer. Where it was just like, okay, cool. I just want to look at this holistically as a journey and figure out a way to improve this. And it's, I don't know. I do feel like there is a, not to just continuously repeat ourselves, but it's like, it's almost that's the part that's been lost with a lot of design system work, where it's been, um, it's that like unnecessary focus on the components and the bits and pieces that go into design
Yeah,
systems.
I part of it I think is like if you think about like the coded aspect of components, right? Like you want to make those little bits and pieces reusable. So I can see where people get really focused and maybe it's like from a practical implementation standpoint, like a developer would want to hyper focus on that because that makes their work easier.
Yeah.
Um, but it really needs to like designers need to think more holistically about um the experience, like the user experience, right? And so that also means not hyper focusing on how to make a component in Figma and using variables and all of that. Like I think that's been such a steep learning curve that maybe consumes a lot of
Yeah.
people's time and energy. Because not everyone has a design system team that can make and focus on making those components. So I think that's kind of like the atomic, like I like atomic design to a certain extent, but I think it's kind of really swung the pendulum way toward components and less
Oh
about
yeah,
pattern.
definitely. Well, and
So
I suppose that's the thing. Like putting my everybody's favorite hat, the devil's advocate hat on. Um, the um, like the time you can understand why people do default to the tangible stuff because they want like time to value really quickly. And one of the easiest ways to show value is like, look at all these things I've built. Especially if you think about it from the perspective, like it's really interesting the way that you were just talking about it, saying that it's very much the designer's sort of role pattern concept. And it is, although I do think that there's even parts of this that are like related. I think there's so many technical constraints as a dev that should be input into the like the way that we create patterns. And actually I think it's possibly one of like the reasons that patterns hasn't been given enough credence is that it's not a concept that is like common within like front end engineering. At least I don't know. I'm curious if any of the devs um would agree with that in terms of like, because that's the thing. It's like I know when I talk to devs that they do definitely think about these things. If we think of, if I use some of those examples of like how you, I don't know, it's like how you deal with passwords um in within your systems, right? And it's like you want that to be uniform across all of the products you have and all the different entry points where they might use passwords and whatnot. Um and like that is so constrained by technical constraints um, that it's one of those things where it's like 100% the engineers should be part of writing the patterns. Um, and I don't think that it's potentially like on the designers to define those patterns wholly.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing, like, and I would definitely encourage people to work with their engineers, right? To kind of figure out the patterns together. I think a lot of times I've seen teams and I worked with teams where it's very much a transactional relationship where the designer's like,
Yeah.
"Here, I made a thing for you," and the developer's like, "Okay, I will code the thing," and not ask questions or make suggestions, right? Like, um, and I feel like that can get also lost too.
And I think part of this is like, again, I feel like this is my common theme throughout this entire podcast series, but it's like a large part of this is just building the right community around your design system, right?
Yeah.
It's around making sure that you do like you don't have that relationship where it is one side dictating to another, or where it's like you're constantly like, I don't know, batting things over a net. Um, because it is one of those things where I don't know, I definitely have had the experience where like front end devs are some of the most opinionated about experience that and things like if there's anything that they see as a like common pattern or like affordance that like we should be following, they're the ones who are going to bring it up, especially because they kind of like something that they've coded over and over again, or like they've used over and over again, and they're the ones who are responsible for it going into the product, so they want to make sure that the experience is like as good as possible. So why wouldn't they want to like have a say in like that experience and those patterns? um and I think that it's like a lot of like common building up that like community to make sure that you've got that common language and common understandings and like common points of view, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's the thing is like, James mentions that, they find that they're not involved early enough in a lot of cases. And I think that's the other thing is like everyone should start talking really, really
Oh,
early days. And it can't hurt, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, as a designer, I can always be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do I need to know? Is there anything I need to be aware of in terms of feasibility? And you can have some really great conversations that way. I also like as a designer, that helped me understand like the dev world a lot better. In terms of like, is something expensive
Yeah.
to create? Like, what else can we do? Where else in the product have they seen this? That type of thing. So, um, it's just a really big benefit for everybody. Maybe that's the thing. Patterns are like the unifying community building thing that we all need.
It is. I do think that there's a massive challenge though. And it's interesting here because I'm sorry if I'm going to butcher your name, but Faramars in the chat is talking about the reluctance of devs to basically get out of their like tooling and like their IDE environment. And I think that part of the problem that we have with patterns at the moment is how we're approaching them and how we're documenting them. I do think that, and I mean, this is a problem that I've had with documentation forever anyway. In that it feels suboptimal for documentation to sit on a separate like entity. Um, Documentation should be where you're doing the work. Um, and I know, there are things coming in zeroheight that might help with this, but like that is a challenge that like I know we've been looking at for a really long time, and it's not an easy challenge to fix. um but I do think that it's one of those things where it's like, um how we deliver the things that we're talking about and how we deliver things like guidance and things like patterns and things that are more conceptual than like practical and needed is like a really important part of this puzzle piece that I don't think anybody's like got yet. They've not fixed it yet. Um, and it's interesting, it's like I do kind of agree. Stephen in the chat said devs don't care about patterns, and it's like I agree, uh, but they fucking should.
So I guess like how can we make everyone care about patterns, like both design, dev, like everybody,
Yeah.
right? So without losing our shit. Like how what's the answer, Luke?
What's the answer? I do think that like I think for now, at least, until we have tooling that better like fixes this problem of like delivering information in a way that people actually like want to get, um, I do think it's a lot of legwork, and that's not a great great answer. But I do think that it's like it's on us, the people who care about the design system, who care about things like patterns, to educate and get them on board. And I think that it's like it goes back to what I was talking about before. It's building that community. I don't think standing on a soapbox and shouting about how important it is probably the right way. You need to bring people along with you, and you need to like show them the benefits of it. And you know, even if that is just saying to devs, "Hey, we're gonna like." You know, the ultimate outcome of this is that you need to talk to people way less, which I don't know, that feels like something that a lot of devs I know uh, would enjoy. But it's like you don't like it's like you won't have to have pointless conversations anymore. How great would that be?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and I think, you know, talking in the language of like what yeah, what people want and like what they ultimately like, what like drives them, is really important. But figuring out what that is in the first place is probably a good idea too.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's almost like when I first started doing design system-y thing, it was really more about alignment. So it's like an alignment system. It wasn't really like a design system per se, but um
Hey.
yeah, like we kind of took screenshots of like the different, you know, login screens or different profile editing screens and to see like what they all looked like across our products. And even if you collect those screens, you can kind of form some patterns, or at least like it's a good gallery to see like what we could do, like what we have done, um, and get those conversations going. Like it doesn't have to be like, I think that's the thing. It just seems really intimidating to document a pattern. Like it seems like what guidelines do you provide and how flexible and where do I say it's okay
Yeah.
to change
But
things
sweet,
and
just steal it off someone else. Like, there's other people who have documented these patterns. I think that's the thing. Like, I think sometimes we're a bit precious about creating like these beautiful, unique snowflakes, and it's like, no, if somebody else has done the work for you, just use that. I
yeah, for
mean,
sure.
screw it. Put it in ChatGPT and see what that says, and if it's any good. Like, it's probably not going to be, but you know, it's like it's a
It's a good
good
starting point,
starter.
right?
It's a good starter for
Yeah.
10. And like that is genuinely, I think, the most important thing is like getting something down and getting something that you can talk about with people. Like, because
Yeah,
that's the other
yeah.
thing. Sharing it and then seeing what other people think is probably the crazy. It's like put it out there and get feedback and iterate. It's almost like this is like a product process or something.
So weird. Um, yeah, because and I think that's the thing is like you're right. Like a lot of people are precious about their
Yeah.
stuff because they're like, no, no, we do things differently, or our thing has to do this, right? But like, you know, if we all relaxed a little bit, looked at like the broader picture, the higher level concept, like it's probably the same.
I mean, it is. It's interesting. So this is something that I'm really like interested in as well, and I know that it's something that like Amy, who I've mentioned before, so Amy Hupe. I don't think I mentioned her full name. I just it's on this podcast now. She's just referred to as Amy. Um, they're looking at like trying to collect like common patterns and make them in the same way that like I know that Brad's really excited about doing like a global design system for like component based stuff. Um, they're looking at wanting to do that at a pattern level, which obviously, as I said, that great resource from if is like a really good starter, but it's pretty small. um Whereas like if we can just start collecting these from everywhere, like I think it's a really great resource to then have and to just use it as a starter. And hey, then you know, what if tools like built those templates in as well. I mean, I don't know. There is something to say about like maybe uniformity and everybody using the exact same patterns, like might result in dystopia, but it also might not. So, like, I think it's a good start. um, but yeah. Yes. Yeah. So we should probably start wrapping it up now because we always go over time as G focused. G pointed out. Jesus. Just completely lost my train of thought there. Um. So that's it for today. if you have any questions you want to fire across for the next episode or any suggestions for topics, please send that through to us. You can do that on email at community@zeroheight.com. You can also come and join the Zeros Slack community, which is the Zero Height Slack community. That's at zeroheight.com/Slack. We're at Zero Height pretty much everywhere on X and whatnot. And you just search us and you'll find it. It's it's pretty easy. What have we got next up? That's a topic.
We are talking about AI. Where can
Hey,
AI actually help with design systems?
I think we've kind of covered this before, so I'm looking forward to diving into it again. Um, because I do think there's more. We never have enough in that same way. Oh, can we just do the whole podcast with AI?
Yeah, I think we should. We should try it, right?
We should try it,
Um,
definitely. But that's going to be exciting. So we're gonna cover off AI and be the definitive voices on that in 2 weeks' time. Until then, see you next time.